In this video, I want to help you understand what the feast or the appointed time of unleavened bread is, its importance, and then how to observe it as a follower of Yeshua. And if you're unfamiliar with the word Yeshua, it just means Jesus in Hebrew. In Leviticus 23, Yahweh tells us in the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, is the Passover of Yahweh. So, the first thing that we need to know is that Passover is the first event of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which lasts a full week. And if you want to learn a little bit more about Passover, I just made a video on that. You can check the link up here below, above, and there you go. So before we move on, one other little caveat, and that is that some groups are going to observe the Passover meal a full 24 hours before the start of unleavened bread. I think there's some justification for that, but I just wanted to alert you. I can't go over the details now because then the video would get too long. Now in verse 6, here's what we're told. Yahweh says, "Then on the 15th day of the same month, there is the feast of unleavened bread to Yahweh. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread." So it's important that you notice that. At least one time on each of the 7 days, we are to eat at least a little bit of unleavened bread because it's an object lesson. Then we learned that the first day and the seventh day are no work days. But that doesn't mean it's a do whatever you want day. Instead, if possible, we're to assemble with other believers in a holy convocation or a holy assembly. In verse 7, here's what we read. "On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work. But for 7 days you shall bring near an offering by fire to Yahweh. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work." So that's it, really. On the first day, we start with the first event. That's the Passover meal. We eat unleavened bread, we don't work, and then we gather together with other believers in worship. And on the last day, the same, kind of. We don't have the Passover meal, but we eat unleavened bread, we don't work, we gather with other believers in worship. So for a whole week, we eat unleavened bread. And that is the basics. It's really not too complicated. Now let's go over the nuances. The first thing is to make sure that all leaven is out of your dwelling places, your houses, for a full week. We need to have it out before Passover on the 14th, and then we keep it out until sundown on the 7th day. In Exodus 12, verses 19 and 20, Yahweh tells us, "7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses. For whoever eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Whether he is a sojourner or a native of the land, you shall not eat anything leavened. In all your places of habitation, you shall eat unleavened bread." Now, of course, I get a logical question. What if you mess up, whether intentionally or unintentionally, and you eat leavened bread, or you disregard the command in some way, and will you lose your place in heaven? And the quick answer is no. You got to remember, these are all object lessons, a shadow. They're important shadows, but we just shouldn't disregard the Father's instruction anyway. If your heart is truly circumcised, you will want to obey. But until I can answer more fully in the Bible, I'll just make it short here. There's a difference between the tabernacle and the sacrificial system of the Torah, and then the real tabernacle in heaven and our eternal high priest. And if you want to read more about this, you can look at Hebrews chapter 9, so I'm just going to leave that there for now. Well, the second thing are the whys. Why the first day and why the seventh day? And why no leaven? Well, in short, the first day commemorates the birth of both a physical and spiritual nation. In Egypt, the Israelites were slaves to Egypt, to Pharaoh and Egypt's gods. But by the blood of a Passover lamb, they were freed from that bondage. And in the same way, all humanity is enslaved to sin. And by the blood of the real Passover lamb, Yeshua, we are freed. So on the first day, we stop and we remember that. Now, what about the last day? I'll admit it, it's a little bit harder to define, but I think there are two things that we could consider. First, the last day represents a completion. In this case, it's a complete separation from bondage. The Bible is full of cycles, and one of those cycles is a 7-cycle or a 7-day cycle, and that completes this cycle. A second is, and this is conjecture, I admit it, but I really do think that the Israelites passed through the Red Sea or Reed Sea on the 7th day. I've done the math, and it is within reason. So what we have potentially is a sort of baptism. On the 7th day, all the chariots of the enemy were drowned, and you are baptized into a new life with a new master. The Israelites were, we are. And finally, why no leaven? Well, here's the truth. When the Israelites left Egypt, the leaven of Egypt didn't necessarily leave them. In other words, salvation and ridding ourselves from the sticky vestiges of the world and sin, it's a process. And our God wants us to get through that process. I mean, he does the work, but he works in tandem with us. He wants us to leave the old slavery behind. He wants us to give ourselves over completely to a new slavery where he is our master. So it's a new leaven, a new lump. And we'll talk about that more in the next video on first fruits and on the Feast of Weeks, or Shavuot in Hebrew. But let me leave you with the words of the Apostle Paul. Reflecting on Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Apostle Paul writes to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. He says, "Your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Clean out the old leaven so that you may be a new lump, just as you are in fact unleavened. For Messiah, our Passover lamb, also is sacrificed. Therefore, let us celebrate the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." So hopefully that helps you, and you'll have a wonderful Passover and whole week of unleavened bread. Shalom, and I'll see you in the next video.